Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Talking Points. So, this week we're going to talk about a subject that gets brought up on the internet a lot when people are talking about politics. So, we're loosely going to be talking about the idea of the red pill. But with that said, a huge qualification is we're going to talk about a specific definition of it, and we're going to talk about the implications of it and to what degree we agree or disagree with it. And that kind of conversation. So we're sidestepping the meta definition of like what the ideal definition of red pilling somebody in terms of politics and worldview would be, and we're more going to use Michael Malice's definition as a springboard. People who've been listening to the show for a while know that I'll name drop Michael Malice probably like one in every 3 episodes, and he seemed really relevant to bring up because we just did a big episode on things like the media and narratives. And we've also talked a lot about a lot of like kind of broad topics that are related to U.S. culture. Like a few episodes ago, we ended up talking about a lot of political strategy and stuff like that. And when it comes to things like messaging, I think Michael Malice has a lot to say. And he brings some interesting lenses to view it all through. So his definition of the red pill that we're going to be talking a lot about today, I'm going to read a direct quote from Michael Malice. That the quote is, "Red pilling is the concept that what is presented as truth by the corporate press is in fact a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep some very unpleasant people in power." So you can see a lot of like very specific language. So it's about the things that are presented as truth by the corporate press, meaning all the establishment institutions, and then it's clearly laying out that it is constructed carefully, right? So it's not just them reporting things that happen. It's to some extent constructed, and that it is designed with the intent to keep the status quo in power or to put certain things in power. So that's what he describes the red pill as. So we'll be delving into the implications on that. Now, I've been listening to Michael Malice for, I guess I'd say 1.5 years or 2 years at this point. Because I got familiarized with him when I started listening to the Tom Woods show. But I know my co-host, Matt, who I'm going to let jump in a second, isn't as, he doesn't follow up with Michael Malice regularly. So I kind of want to get his first thoughts on like the topic in general and his reaction to the whole definition, I guess, and this way of looking at the world. And then we'll kind of start jumping into more specific points or some thoughts we're having.
Thank you for the introduction, Matt. And I guess I'm going to preface everything I say with something I've already told you, which is I'm going to be thinking out loud pretty much this entire episode. There's probably aspects of this discussion that I've thought about before, but I've not really considered Michael Malice's particular definition of the red pill before, and all the various implications associated with that definition. So it's possible that a couple episodes from now I could listen to this and decide that everything I said was wrong, and then I'll be changing course and altering what I say in the future. And then I guess it might be helpful to give a little bit of like background or context. If you don't know, the concept of the red pill, well, originally, of course, it comes from the Matrix. And if I actually never seen the Matrix movies, but is it the red pill that allows you to see reality, and then the blue pill that keeps you in your little enclave of fantasies and illusions, or keeps you within the Matrix, I guess. But then it was taken up in the conversations people were having about feminism. So you'd have people in that context, of course. The red pill, generally speaking, refers to people who are anti-feminist, who are maybe were feminist and then stopped being feminist, or just see issues with a lot of modern day feminist talking points. That, of course, is not the definition. that we're talking about here. So, and basically the only thing I haven't looked I haven't looked too much into what Michael Malice has said on this topic. I saw the short video you sent me, which I guess was a clip from Douglas Murray's podcast when he was having a conversation with Michael Malice, and I think that quote you read was from that conversation. And then basically, I guess to expand on what Malice was saying, to be red-pilled is to be aware that be aware of these constructed narratives that these unpleasant people who are continuing to be in power are foisting upon the masses. I think to be black-pilled means you're basically a complete pessimist, or you think that the bad people are going to win. And then I guess to be white-pilled means either you're hopeful that these bad people can be taken out of power, or you'll at least the good people will die, not die. At least the good people will be defeated. They won't go down without a fight, I guess is the cliche way of putting it. So I guess like I kind of have two broad thoughts off the bat, right off the bat. The first one is I almost take what he says to be so obvious as to not warrant discussion. And I guess I say that because I think I've been aware for a long time that the government, the media, and maybe to a lesser extent academia, all have these narratives that they these narratives that give them reasons for doing what they do, and give them reasons for their existence, and give them reasons for their conduct. Yeah, that just seems self-evident to me. On the other hand,
well, okay, maybe I think this might be a good time to jump in though, and kind of and maybe we can talk about, I guess, people who say things that are very blue-pilled and it's not obvious to them. And I don't think that's a point worth, I guess, kind of glossing over, because I think I agree with you to where, there have been things that are said that are pretty much catering to the establishment, right? So like somebody will say something and it's like they're paying lip service to the status quo, and I'll hear it and I'll be like, of course they're saying that because that's the talking point. But not everybody has that reaction. And then the example in a video we watched is Gary Johnson in 2016 talking about Hillary Clinton. And he pretty much says something along the lines of Hillary Clinton was a great public servant. And then, of course, he calls Trump like a edgy name and mocks him because it's okay to mock Trump. And it's not okay to actually say anything really bad about Hillary Clinton because, of course, she actually had important roles to the establishment. So she's actually a good person, even if you disagree with her. So Gary Johnson is essentially using this blue-pilled way of viewing the world because he's willing to accept the line, the talking point, that Hillary Clinton's a good person because she's been Secretary of State and she's the first woman running for president and she has the good interest of everybody in heart. But of course, Trump, because he's crass, is probably evil. So everybody can, use any derogatory word in his way without anybody flinching. So it isn't obvious to a lot of people, especially if you go on Twitter, right? And you see certain people who are like almost like automatons reacting to things like, oh yes, of course, he can't say that. He's this person. You can't say this negative thing about a woman because they're a woman. And it's all these people have these reactions that are to you and I. It's like you guys are just noise. None of what you're saying matters, and this is the show part of things. But it is carefully constructed. If somebody's on a mainstream network, you pretty much had to imply that even if you thought Hillary Clinton wasn't a good person, well, it wasn't a good leader or a good candidate, you had to imply they were a good person because that was the constructed narrative. So, I did want to wanted to give a moment to say, like, a lot of people, especially online, and a lot of people who are hyper, like, hooked into news, it's really obvious to us that that's not the case. But I think like the people who are on the left that consume very little news are very likely to adopt a worldview that is directly opposed to what Michael Malice presents. So you have thoughts on that?
Well, in our text, when we were texting back and forth about this topic, you stole a phrase, or not stole a phrase, you took a phrase from Noam Chomsky from one of his books, Manufacturing Consent. And now Chomsky and Malice, they obviously don't have the same like end goals politically. And they might disagree somewhat on what it means to be, red-pilled versus blue-pilled. But I think they both have similar. They say that I think the way they talk about these overarching narratives that people in power are telling us is similar. I actually haven't read Manufacturing Consent, but I've seen Chomsky talk about, or I've seen Chomsky give the synopsis of the arguments he gives in those books, and basically the media is. I mean, of course, it's complicated because people are complicated, and Chomsky's not saying like he's not saying everyone in the media is a bad person. What he is saying is the media is serving the interests of, if you'll forgive the phrase, the elites. That the media is serving the interest of the Democratic and Republican politicians that have been that are in power or have been in power for decades, and the media, given the what the media is trying to put forth as news or put forth as legitimate political commentary, there are limits to what they can talk about. So to pat ourselves, or if I may say a few words that sound self-congratulatory about you and I, we named this show, we named this podcast Beyond Talking Points for a reason. The media, they have talking points that they're given from on high. Again, I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial. It's just the nature of the system and the power dynamics that are going on. You're not going to be on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC if you don't if you don't operate in with these certain talking points that are okay to bring up. And if you bring up anything beyond that, you are marginalized, or you just won't be on TV for very long. The obvious example is everyone knows of Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks, and it's quite easy to poke fun at Cenk Uygur and see his biases in action. But I bring him up just because he had for a while, he had a TV show on MSNBC. And it's quite interesting. If you hear, Uygur was on Joe Rogan's podcast many years back, and he talked about his experience at MSNBC and why he left. And it's interesting, or I guess the reason I find it to be interesting is, Uygur basically said when he was talking to Rogan that, hey, I was going after the corporate Democrats. I was railing against the Democratic Party and hammering home that the Democratic Party is not your friend. And I was told to, shut up. And if I shut up, and I was put in, in a worse time slot when I wouldn't. And then they said they'll give me a raise if I change my tune. And I didn't, and so I left. again, you can, even if you dislike Cenk Uygur, I think that's story is illustrative of the cesspool that is corporate media. I'll let you jump in here for a little bit, and then I guess I want to talk about maybe some of my criticisms or some of my reservations with Michael Malice's definition of the red pill. I'm getting some feedback on your end, by the way.
So is it working okay now?
Still some feedback, but I guess it's not that bad.
Well, I mean, we already asked about it, so maybe we should do that. Well, when you say feedback, is just static?
Static, yeah.
How about now? Oh.
Ooh.
How about now?
Now I hear a weird tone.
Well, it should sound different than it was before because this is the actual microphone. I don't think the microphone was even working before.
No, I think we're good now. I think we're good.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the whole time we've been recording, we've been using my laptop mic.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're good now.
Okay. So I'll pause for 5 seconds, and then we can cut that part. Yeah. So when we talk about what is allowable by the media, to me, the first thing I think of is Tom Woods, because Tom Woods wrote a book where I think the subtitle was setting fire to the 3x5 card of allowable opinion. And the thing that Tom Woods kind of gets at is there's a 3x5 index card that has all the acceptable views you're allowed to have before you're and once you go off that index card, when you're talking about politics or something, you are no longer acceptable in the discourse. So you've now walked too far out of line. You're not in the Overton window, and now whatever you say doesn't matter. So I can see that happening to somebody like a member of the Young Turks, but it also happens to people on the opposite end. And then when we're talking about, I guess, they're carefully constructive narratives, and how I feel like it's pretty clear they're pushing agendas. It raises to me the question of what is the point of the news? And it seems to me that you can't genuinely say it's to inform people, because there are some things that they, spend days and days covering in a news cycle that is literally just not validated stories, or poorly validated stories, or anonymously sourced stories that are essentially character assassinations and aren't about policy. So it's not about something that will tangibly affect your life. It's about here's a source story that says something negative about a person. So then the example that comes to my mind is the story on how Trump allegedly said a bunch of bad things about military troops. And this came out maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So it was before you got coronavirus. And everything about that story implied that a certain person was the one who said it because he's the only person who could have. But then I think he said he didn't do it. And I know it was either a senator or somebody who was recently in this administration said that he didn't say it, but it was anonymously sourced and anonymously validated. And they spent 2 days only talking about how Trump said something bad about somebody. And it's okay, the fact that you're dedicating so much time to this shows to me that you want to push this message more than you care about substantive issues. So the media is not about talking about substantive issues. So that's one of the examples that comes to my mind. And then the same could be said about, I guess, really, you could say the same thing about Fox News, though, because Fox News won't cross certain lines. Fox News will generally have certain people on it who say certain establishment talking points. And it's kind of like you have this Borg, which is the mainstream Democratic Party and the mainstream Republican Party. And if they move a little bit more to the left or right, it's kind of negligible. And those are the people who are allowed to talk. And beyond that, it's just they only want to push messaging that keeps those people in power. And I think that applies a lot to a lot of the pro-democracy stuff you hear. Because whether you're listening to Fox News or whether you're listening to NBC, they'll talk about, even if they're talking about something that you might think hurts democracy, like Trump not accepting the results, people on Fox News will spin it as, no, we need to investigate this because that will make the results more valid. and we think the real result is this, and we want to protect democracy, and we think democracy is stolen. So even though the talking points might be different, and they might want different people in charge, in the end, it's all about democracy. You don't hear Michael Malice on Fox News saying, I'm glad Trump's denying the results of the election because I want democracy to fall. You'll never hear that. So even if the people are rooting for the different teams, it's like this is always going to be a point that is in the establishment's interest, and you always hear argued for, even if you're listening to right-wing or left-wing establishment news. That's on the 3x5 card. That's what they're going to talk about. Dissident voices aren't really allowed. So, yeah. Do you want to? You can talk a little bit about what I just said, and then jump into some of your criticisms, and then maybe, depending on how long we go on this, we might address some things that I laid out that might be good conversation starters that are relevant to this.
I think I would just add, or I think I agree mostly with what you said. I might add the caveat though. When it comes to the major news sources, I'll just take the New York Times as an example. You could probably apply this to most major news outlets. If I read, the New York Times, I'm not worried that they're not telling me the facts on the ground. I'm worried about the way they're interpreting the facts and the way they are the way they are putting the facts together in order to sell me a particular worldview. That's not to say there aren't news sources or pseudo news sources out there that will outright lie, but I do think it's important when we start talking about like the mainstream media. My issue with them is generally not, oh, they're lying to me about this or that fact. They're lying to me about their lies are subtler than that. Did you want to respond to that perhaps, or?
I think since this is a Michael Malice episode, I think he has a quote that I don't remember off the top of my head, but he always says like factually true, and then it's like maybe it's semantically false or something like that. Where a lot of times it's not that they don't report facts, but it's like imagine you have like a 10-foot by 10-foot rectangle that exists, and that's where all the facts are. They're in that in that square, and then the ones that are reported are maybe like a 5-foot by 5-foot part within that. So it's like I'm not usually concerned that what they're reporting is a lie. I'm usually concerned that they selectively pick what they tell me. And if there's things important, they'll generally tell me it, whether it's directly related to their agenda or not. If you can't ignore some things, but it's generally selected, and they will say things that are true, but a lot of times they will not give you the whole story, and it's because they'll tell you the true part to paint the dissident in a bad light, and that's what their goal is. Their goal is to construct the narrative. So if they can take a fact and say, like you have a story and there's 8 angles on the story, and a lot of the story could be something that people be neutral on, but then you hear that like whatever that story is makes a certain group of people upset, then the headline of the story can be Trump's messaging on X upsets this group, and then that group could be an important group when it comes to, I guess, like an upcoming election. And even though the stats could be like, but nobody else cares, but it's slightly positive for this other group, the headline can be the negative one, right? So it's stuff like that where it's like technically true, but not always true. If you know what I mean. I think that's important to note.
Yeah, I think I would agree. So I guess I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, and maybe talk about some of my skepticism or reservations with Michael Malice's argument. I'm always a little uneasy when people start using the term red pill, and maybe I think it's because generally it's people who they feel like they've cracked the code. They feel like they've really like found truth with a capital T. And I think when it comes to just like basic, when it comes to our understanding of the world, I think we need to try to be, in some ways, more modest than that. We need to be skeptical of people. Maybe Malice doesn't actually do this, and I'm speaking more here of just the term red pill in and of itself. Because in some ways, one could make the argument that he himself is constructing a narrative. Now, of course, he doesn't have the power that the mainstream media or the government or academia does. So it's not his little narrative isn't going to be influencing public policy. But I'm just not sure. I would want to almost like sit down with Michael Malice and like kind of hear how he thinks about like what he thinks about, or how he kind of conceptualizes what he means when he talks about the red pill, and how he's come to the conclusions he's come to, and the evidence he would bring forth to the table to support his argument. I just think we need to be careful and not think that we know more than we do. We need to be aware of our own ignorance. That was the whole. That's what Socrates, lived and died for. He knew what he didn't know. So that's probably a good. That would probably be a good like conversation topic, honestly.
I like that you said that, because it's almost like I don't know if you know what you just bargained for by bringing that up. And I say that because I know you haven't listened to a lot of Michael Malice, but Michael Malice has a very specific persona that he uses, and you pretty much identified his whole shtick. And I think his shtick is justified, and his whole way of going about things is somewhat a gimmick, but it's also the whole point of his worldview. So he pretty much he revels in being dismissive of other people's views, and it's in a way that he finds productive, because he clearly sees our system as something that is not worth rehabilitating. And every time he dismisses somebody out of hand, he is, in his mind, polarizing people further and bringing us closer to a national divorce. And that's the only reasonable outcome. So if you said what you just said to him, he'd probably laugh in your face, because the whole point isn't that he's necessarily right. And I think he's more right than wrong, and he does have plenty of evidence to back up his claims. And if he wanted to, he could go through it. But if somebody went on Twitter and asked him for something, he would just say something like "your mom," and he literally will just respond to people with "your mom." Because the whole point is he's dismissing you, and he is like, why should I talk to you? You're a random plebeian, and I wouldn't give you the time of day on the street. You don't matter. And he'll say that and be outright dismissal. There's a beautiful video that I would implore people to look up, where Michael Malice is on Kennedy. I think that's the show that got canceled that used to be on Fox. And he's talking about teachers in academia. And he pretty much says, yeah, it's awesome that a bunch of professors are going to get fired and whatnot, and all of them are pathetic, and they can't make their way in the real world, because if they could, then they'd write books that people would actually be interested in buy. And then he pats himself on the back because he's a successful author and those people aren't. And he's like, all they do is indoctrinate people who are, essentially low intelligence. I mean, if you're an 18-year-old, you are generally, and you're in college, you're generally, I guess, like smart in an IQ way, but you probably haven't been exposed to a lot of critical thinking. But he's pretty much saying, you got a bunch of sheep delivered to your door and you indoctrinated them. Good job. That's not hard. You have nothing of value to say, or you'd make a bunch of money, but you don't have anything of value to say. And all you are is part of this, of the cathedral. Right? He has no respect for them. And he says this on a panel with a guy who immediately starts talking about how his dad was a professor. And then he starts pretty much saying kind of the skeptic position of, you shouldn't be dismissing thousands of people. And then Michael Malice corrects him and calls them parasites, because they're parasites, not people. So the whole tone of Michael Malice is based on arrogance and being dismissive of the opponent's position. But it doesn't mean he's wrong because he won't hold people's hands and walk them through the reasoning. right? Because every time you turn on CNN, here's a clear example of somebody either knowingly or unknowingly, because Brian Stelter might really be that stupid, but he's at best unknowingly, he's at least at best unknowingly going forward with an agenda that is bad for people, and he's holding up the norm. So he's doing this regardless of if he himself is an evil person, or regardless of if he's getting direct orders from some higher up. That's what he's doing. And if all of a sudden Brian Stelter woke up the next day and what was an enlightened ANCAP who he body switched with Tom Woods or something, if something like that happened, he'd get kicked off the air in months, because that's not the acceptable opinion. So I guess I'd say is, you could go through a lot of Michael Malice's work, and he does talk substantively, but it's funny because he is completely opposed to you in terms of skepticism of our own knowledge when it comes to political issues. He would tell you, no, those people want to control your life. They want to tell you what you can and can't do, and they want complete power over you, and they want you to submit to their domination, and then they have institutions set up so you can't overtake them. They want you they want you to submit and be obedient. And I don't think he's wrong about that. So on some hand, it's like, sure, you can make an argument that all the people are well-intentioned and actually want better for us, but they just screw it up all the time and then simultaneously enrich themselves. But I would say he's more right than wrong. And I would defend him on those points. And I like his dismissive attitude. It's very entertaining, and a lot of people, especially randos who think they're smarter than people on Twitter, it's like, you probably don't deserve the time of day. And there's nothing to be gained from discourse with somebody who pops up and says you're stupid because of one point. If somebody pops up on Twitter, if any of you guys are Twitter users, and says something really stupid and thinks they're smart, it's like, don't have a 10 response back and forth with them. It's not going to be productive. People aren't swayed that often by logic and reason. So if you're going to try to reason with somebody who pops up and says something usually snarky at you, you're not going to convince them. And he's correct about that. So.
So there's two trains of thought I could go down. We could continue going down this particular train of thought and kind of go over then maybe the differences in like attitudes or argumentative strategies between Michael Malice and myself. Or we could talk about academia, because I think that's an issue where you and I probably do disagree, at least to an extent. Do you have a preference as to which rabbit hole we go down?
I guess to close the loop on the first one before we go into academia, I would say that I would expect us to disagree on being intentionally inflammatory, because I at this point, like, I guess maybe 8 months ago, I wouldn't have considered myself this, but at this point, I pretty much don't believe in the system, and I have very little intention of reforming it. So I'm okay with people being further polarized and hating each other more. Because, if somebody wants to rule your life, it's okay to, I guess, start stuff with them and essentially say, no, you want to control me, you're a bad person, and then leave it be. And then hopefully, if the goal is a national divorce, I think Michael Malice's tactics are better at pushing people towards a national divorce. You've mentioned that you're more of a reformer, which is fair because most people are reformers. And if somebody wanted to reform the system or make the system better, you wouldn't want to just say your mom to people. You'd want to politely guide them in the correct direction. So I think that might appropriately close that loop so we can move on. I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's kind of probably why we disagree more or less.
Well, I'll just say a little more about this, so then we'll go to the academia portion. There's actually a good quote by, I want to say it was an Israeli activist, and I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he said something to the effect of encouraging signs of polarization. I'm not actually opposed to polarization or even encouraging polarization or talking or arguing in such a way as to increase the conflict in the sense that in the context of the battle of ideas, because there are ideas out there that I think need to be put to rest, or should have been put to rest 40, 50 years ago, that people are still spouting. On the other hand, maybe I would need to like see more of Michael Malice's work to really comment. And this might even just be like a difference of like personality. I do try. This might not seem productive, and this might seem like lovey-dovey, like liberal nonsense to some people. But I think it's a legitimate a way to think about the world. I never forget. I never forget that everyone from you and me to George W. Bush and Barack Obama to Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, there's one thing we all share in common, and that's being human. I think when we're talking about politics and philosophy and just the basic questions of life, I think there can be a tendency to minimize people or dehumanize people, and I suspect that perhaps Michael Malice is not very concerned with that, but I would be concerned with that because I'm not sure that is I'm not sure that gets us anywhere in the long run, because then I don't think like you get to the heart of the matter. I don't think you can fully grasp what's going on in the world if we just kind of write people off as stupid or bad or evil. And I brought up all kinds of people from you and me to Hitler and Stalin for a reason. This goes all the way from normal people to the worst tyrants and dictators of history. But we're not dealing in our like political in American politics or just modern day politics, generally speaking, we're not dealing with the worst dictators of history. George Bush and Barack Obama are not the same as Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. I would say that Barack Obama and George Bush they are responsible for a lot of horrible policy. There's blood in their hands. Things they have done have had tremendous human costs. Humendous isn't the word. Tremendous human costs that cannot be written off as differences of opinion. But I also can't say that Barack Obama and George Bush are just these monsters that they are people that got into politics for certain reasons, were foisted in these positions for certain reasons, into a system that works a certain way. They have certain like ideologies that they're following, and so they act in certain ways. So I guess just to kind of wrap up, I do think, and correct me if like I am misinterpreting Michael Malice's like attitude, but if his attitude is more to dehumanize people he thinks are like ruining his life or trying to control his life, then I think he's wrong.
Yeah, I think dehumanize is the wrong word because the problem is he understands them, right? So he would say, no, I actually do know that so Barack Obama, if he's going to say something, I generally know the line of thought or the heritage intellectually it's coming from. So I could be like, okay, well, Obama will typically say things from this point of view, So you could say I'm dehumanizing him because I'm saying, well, it's not really him speaking, it's the ideology. But in the end, if I dismiss Obama, it's not because I don't think Obama's a person. It's because I think that ideology has nothing of value to say. So I think I think Michael Malice would say a lot of the people who respond to him on Twitter are people who are essentially robots that are responding based on the talking points they've been indoctrinated in. And even though he would acknowledge that they are people with certain opinions, he would say, that's fine, but I'm not going to work with these people because I have no intention of letting these people have control over me, and I don't want to try to rehabilitate things with them. So I wouldn't say that's dehumanizing. I would say, like, I mean, I don't want to start a whole sideways argument about what it means to dehumanize people, because I think that comes more into play when it comes to actual policy, and that's why I have my political views, is because of dehumanization. But when it comes to just discourse, I think dismissing people because you know what their views are and they've told you their views is fine because you've listened to their views or you know their perspective. And then you go, okay, that perspective isn't worth listening to. I don't think that's dehumanization. You're just saying, like, I mean, if somebody comes up to you and they tell you that their main agenda is something that you find like completely ridiculous, I mean, you can say it's less ridiculous to think healthcare should be a right. You can say that's less ridiculous than saying that we should move to Mars. But if somebody came up to you and said, hey, I only care about my number one political issue is moving to Mars, you'd be like, okay, this person's probably not somebody I'm going to have a valuable discussion with. And then instead of just being that narrow, though, he's like, I'm going to spread the net. And I think it's fair because of a lot of reasoning he said. And I think it's pretty clear if you look at the discourse or the way people communicate nowadays, it's like, yeah, a lot of people aren't people you can rehabilitate, especially people who are very, very loyal to what Michael Malice would call the cathedral, which is people who don't accept his view of the red pill because they actually think all these people are their betters, and they're like, yeah, that person on CNN said something, and that's pretty much them reading scripture. It's true, and the way they framed it is true, and I'm right, and I'm going to go recite that to people, and I'm going to use that talking point as a line when I argue with my friend. And it's like, yeah, he doesn't think that those are the types of people who are worth working with. I don't think that's dehumanizing. I don't think it's giving him the credit he deserves for the logic he's gone through to dismiss them. I think he's done a lot of work to get to the point where it's like, so therefore we can dismiss these people. Or I don't think they should control my life, and I don't think they have any real claim to control my life, so these people are not worth working with. I wouldn't say that's dehumanizing them. I would definitely agree with dismissing them. I just think that's the wrong word. I think he has a very, very human view of the world, and he's actually a surprisingly like optimistic person.
But I think if you start using terms like that person's stupid, that person's bad, that person's terrible, I think that is a subtle form of dehumanization.
Well, I think he'll call people evil because of what they've done, and he's treating them as people, right? So if you treat somebody, and I mean, this kind of steps into the whole ground of like how much responsibility should you have based on your actions. But it's like if I talked about anybody who's been president in my lifetime, I pretty much think that they've been in charge of the biggest gang in the world. That's my view of them. Therefore, I think, you know, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, I think they've been acting in evil ways because they've held up a system that I think is disgusting. Now, I don't think they're not people. I'm actually giving them the credit that they could have done something about it if they wanted to, but they had no intention of it because they believe in these establishment views that I think are deeply immoral. So I'm humanizing them by holding him accountable to his beliefs and the things they've upheld. So I think that's why I just don't like the humanization language. I am being inflammatory. I think all those people have done atrocious things by upholding the norm in the state, and they've had the power to undo it, and they haven't. So I think they've done things that are deeply wrong. And I think that's something Michael Malice would say. But I would say you're dehumanizing them if you're saying, no, they're just a robot, and they just did what the establishment told them, and they did neoliberal things, or they did neoconservative things. And that's what everybody's doing. So you can't really blame them. That's what they were taught is good. It's like, I think that's more dehumanizing. And I think that might be what he would get at too. But I don't know if you'd literally frame it that way.
I just think we have to get, or there's a tendency with certain people, such as Michael Malice. Again, I'm not terribly familiar with his work. We need to get away, or especially when we're talking about politics and like these political figures and like the how we judge them. I guess from an ethical perspective. We gotta get away from like harsh moralization, because
Hey,
on the one hand,
I just need to jump in. I think we might be okay. If we want to go down this road, this is fine. But this is something I've definitely been thinking about a lot this last month. So if we go down this road, it's going to be a huge can of worms, because I can already tell I'm going to disagree with you to like the furthest extent possible. Because I think just in the last month, like I've come to the exact opposite conclusion of what you seem to be laying out. So if we start talking about this, that's fine. But that's the track we're going. If you want to extend the dialogue on this part. So I think I'm going to toss the ball to you to pick either this track that we're on, or we can save it for another time, or we can go down to the academia of stuff. But if we go down the academia stuff, we might end up inevitably hitting this wall again. So, we could find out. But I'm just saying, like, I think this will be a pretty extensive, feeling out of disagreements if this is the route we pursue.
well, I'm going to go down this route and just see what happens. And maybe we can, if possible, or if there's time, maybe we can tie in some chat about academia, or maybe we'll have to leave that for another episode. We'll see. Okay. My basic argument. So I guess like when I'm referring to moralism, I'm referring to an attitude. The word I think actually comes from like a 19th century like Christian movement, but the way I'm using it obviously does not refer to that. It refers to anybody who is creating in their mind this sort of this rigid framework of behavior that people should or should not follow. Maybe another way to put it would be thinking about human behavior in terms of like good or evil, good or bad, right or wrong. This goes back almost to many episodes back. We did a little episode where I talked about the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. One of his books is titled Beyond Good and Evil. And that's basically what I'm trying to get at here. That does not mean, I'm not saying that people like Barack Obama are robots. I'm not saying they're not, I'm not holding them responsible for their actions. But I think if someone were to come up to me and say, Barack Obama is a terrible person, I would need to sit down with them and explain why that is a simplification, why that statement it is a simplification of Barack Obama and a simplification of just what it means to be human. You'll have to sort of tie this back into, I guess, Michael Malice and how I'm misinterpreting or misinterpreting him or interpreting him correctly. But that's really, I guess, the point I'm trying to get at. And I'll let you jump in here. I have like examples. I have more I can say about it, but I'll let you jump in here.
So far, I agree that's a simplification, but I don't think it's untrue. So like if somebody came up to me and said Barack Obama's a terrible person, I would agree that it's it's simplifying to say that. Just like if we talked about how every fact has like has a million facts tied into it. So if I say my laptop is black, my laptop's not white or red or blue or rainbow colored. So when somebody says Obama is a terrible person, it is simplifying and it's inflammatory. But I mean, I could write you a 30-page book probably on the spot about why Obama's done terrible things. And if somebody said Obama's a uniquely terrible person, I'd be like, oh, well, it's not that unique. Everybody who's been the leverages of power that's had a similar position to him has typically followed that up. It's not very unique. But I don't think, I mean, I would agree that he's a terrible person. I would say that he was the head of the state that stole from millions and millions of people without their consent, and he did nothing to stop it. If anything, he did things to further expand it. He did things that empowered, and he financially empowered people directly around him through policies. He helped push forward a piece of legislation that helped derail the whole, well, I mean, everything involving, I mean, I guess we don't need to go into a thing about healthcare, but everything involving healthcare was already pretty corrupt. But he didn't make that better by proposing an incredibly complex bill that didn't even help people that much and only made everything more cronyistic. So I'd be like, yeah, pretty much everything Obama did in his career, I would say is probably a bad thing, arguably evil, just like most people who have governed states. So I would be comfortable saying that. Like, I don't know his personal life, but I would say the damage he's done to every American by not rolling back the state is more noteworthy than what he did in his personal life. Now, I agree that it's a simplification to say that one sentence. It's obviously simplification, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, right? So that's why. And in general with moralizing, I mean, you have to argue why your morals are true. So if somebody says like, I hate Matt because Matt doesn't hate gay people, and it's like, okay, well, I don't hate gay people. Right. And it's like, well, why would I hate gay people? I have no real reason to, because I don't really care what other people do. I hang out with like the same handful of people most of the time, and it's great. And I don't really have strong feelings either way. It's not like I think I give somebody a high five if I hear they're gay, and it's not like I start booing somebody if they're gay. I just don't care. So, but somebody might say, well, Matt, that's deeply immoral of you because being gay is a sin. And it's like, well, why do you think that? And it's like, well, if you quote scripture to make a point to me, I say, well, I don't believe in your holy book, so I don't care. So now we've both moralized, and we both use different arguments, and we both come to different conclusions. So I think moralizing is fine, because if you're making a good point, then you're back up so you can defend your moralization. Right. So I would say, well, Obama's bad and is a terrible person. It's like, why? It's like, well, you've heard my hour-long arguments about why violating individuals' consent is dehumanizing and evil and whatnot. So even if somebody thinks it's a good thing, I think them imposing it on others is evil. And it's like, hey, you think I'm wrong. That's why we disagree on politics. That's fine. But I don't think that I'm wrong, and I think I make a pretty good argument when people hear me out a lot of the time. I know I haven't swayed you, and that's fine, and I know a lot of people won't be swayed, but I've persuaded a lot of people in my personal life, and I like talking about it. So I don't see anything wrong with me using that language, because I think I can defend the moralizing that I do. And as I mentioned before, calling people outright evil is really genuinely showing my absolute disdain with the status quo. Because I think people are doing things that are pretty much heinous, and I'm not talking about the murder and the murder in foreign countries. I mean, I think that's heinous, but I just think on the ground here, the fact that everybody in the city I'm in gets robbed 30% of their income and nobody talks about it is heinous. Like, I do, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that's how I feel about it. So I think moralizing is worth doing because it actually encapsulates how important I think the issue is, and then I can defend why. And if you disagree, that's cool, but I don't think there's anything wrong with using the language I used.
I think maybe this is very I guess my argument is a fairly complex, and there's like different angles to it, because my issue, like, I guess my issue with the if someone, again, going back to my little thought experiment, if someone comes to me and says Barack Obama's a terrible person, if that is simply a rhetorical flourish, in other words, if that's just like kind of extreme language, or just like a blunt statement someone's using, and they realize it's a blunt statement and they're not using it, they're not necessarily saying that as like a statement of fact, I guess, then I wouldn't have a problem with it. But I think if someone were to say that to me, that they would basically be saying, no, Barack Obama is a terrible person. Like, that is what he is. That is who he is. That is what he is to the core of his being at some level. And that I guess is where I am not able to go along with statements like that. Now, of course, when it comes to, I'm not saying, or I'm not arguing for like amorality, or I'm not arguing for the lack of morality necessarily, but I think like when I use the term moralization, I'm really referring to like a very rigid morality, a very strict morality, or morality that is concerned with a morality that is very quick to make judgments, very quick to chastise people for the supposed bad things they've done. That really is what I'm getting at. That's really what I'm arguing against. When we're talking about morality and ethics, again, I'm going to go back to Nietzsche here. Another phrase he uses, or of a book he never wrote, but he was going to, was the transvaluation of all values. We really need to think of better ways, healthier ways, more exact ways to discuss like ethics and morality. But I think the way people do it is so sloppy and ridiculous as to be insulting.
Yeah, so I think the place we fall in line most on the issue is we both think it's bad because it's often done in a sloppy manner, right? But in the end, I think it's done bad when it's a talking point and people don't know what they're talking about. And a lot of the times when people talk, they don't know what they're talking about. So it's not like I'm talking about like a unique set of people. This occurs. I mean, everybody does it at least some of the time. So it's like, yeah, if somebody says Obama is evil, and then it's like, well, I think he's evil because I think he's secretly a Muslim, and I think he actually wants America to die, and he's literally acting with evil, then it's like, okay, that's not good. But I think the reason why is because his argument sucks, right? If somebody says, I think Obama's evil to the core because I think neoliberalism is evil to the core, and I think neoliberalism is evil to the core because I think it does X, Y, and Z that dehumanizes people and does X, Y, and Z, then it's like, yeah, maybe I wouldn't phrase it that way, but you're right, you know? And I think you can make a general argument that just the phrases good, bad, and evil are imprecise, but I don't think that means you shouldn't use them. I mean, a lot of politics is leaning on rhetoric of sorts, and it's a word that I wouldn't be ready to throw out because I think sometimes you need to appropriately convey disgust or disdain, and if you do that with technical words, in a way, but by using too many technical words or phrasing, you actually dehumanize the conversation, a word we've been throwing around a lot. But if you're too technical about it, then you actually take the humanity out of the conversation. So if I give you a 200-page book about like a specific policy that Obama did that led to negative consequences for everybody, then you could read that and be like, wow, Obama was a bad technocrat. And then it's like, no, I could point that book and be like, no, that's why he's evil. He thinks he can centrally plan it all, and then he does it and it makes everybody's life worse. That's what evil is. So it's like, or that can be an element of a person acting in an evil nature. So it's like by taking that language out, it's like you may be overly making things fact-based, but everything we're talking about is about morality. So it's like you need to have charged language because you're talking about intuitions, and intuitions are charged. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not against it, and then people should just be open to tuning people out if they go too far or they're making a bad argument. And that's why, like, I'm not about silencing people, but I'm very much about the second somebody clearly is towing a line that is not valuable and you've investigated before, stop listening to them. That's a good thing to do. So if somebody's making a bad argument, it's like, wow, I hate people who make bad arguments. I'm not going to listen to them. But it doesn't mean that it's like we should throw away all these words that reach something that's actually like, I guess, a human thing, a human way that we convey our feelings and values about something that you can actually argue for. So I guess that's why I'm in the other camp.
So, I mean, I use good, bad, evil. I use those words too. But I recognize they're just shorthand. If I say, I don't know, Henry Kissinger is evil, that's a shorthand statement for a couple hour long conversation about the terrible things that he did. But that's not me. That's not me saying that is who he is. He's Henry Kissinger. He's a human being, and I can't.
Okay, I think I need to double down because I think we're almost agreeing, and that's bad.
I need to finish what I was going to say.
Okay, good. Go ahead, because I'm going to make the opposite point, and then we'll go down that road after.
Okay. This goes back almost to sort of okay. So there's a quote by actually no, I don't think that's relevant. I'm going to scratch that. I read a lot about and think a lot about like history, right? Because history is just interesting subject to me, but also I think it's helpful if I want to know, understand human life now. I should understand what life was like in the past. And when we start to take apart people, or when we start to analyze people through the lens of morality, I think that people really don't want to go down that route, in the sense that nobody's gonna end well. Nobody's gonna look good at the end of the day. If we're actually like keeping score, if we're actually going to like analyze people's life to the point where like, okay, we're going to put this in the bad camp, we're going to put this in the good camp. I just don't think it's gonna go well for anybody. It's easy to do that with people we don't like, but then people don't want the shoe to go on the other foot. They don't want that kind of rigid analysis to be thrown back to them. Now, that's not to say everyone's the same and there are distinctions to be made. You and I aren't in a position of power, so we don't have the responsibility. We didn't have the responsibility, or we don't have the culpability that a Henry Kissinger or Barack Obama or George Bush have. But then, going back to my point about history, I think about various historical figures. An easy example that comes up for me is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson is one of my favorite U.S. presidents, but he was also a slave owner. He owned, I think it's over 600 slaves in his lifetime. That was horrible. That was awful. That was atrocious. That was, you could say, evil. How do I judge him as a person based on that? You can go down the list of any like famous historical figure, and you can find skeletons in their closet, as the saying goes. But this is not, I want to be clear, this is not me making excuses for someone like Henry Kissinger, like, oh, I'm a bad person and Henry Kissinger's a bad person, so we wash. But it is me, we need the proper perspective, I think, when we're analyzing human behavior, if we want to get to the core of what's going on, and if we want to change the world and make the world a better place. But if we just and going back to like your comments about like people on Twitter, like I don't have Twitter, and the main reason is it's not going to get past statements like Donald Trump is evil. People often they don't go past they don't go deeper into that statement. They just say Donald Trump's evil, go away if you disagree with me. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? Like we have to break down that statement. We have to look at the evidence. We have to think about all the factors involved to understand Donald Trump's place in the world. So we again, I guess to like just to hammer this point home, morality or moralism, I think does not, or in the way, at least in the way that it's used, it does not allow for the complexities of human nature and just the complexities of human life. And that's not, you're not going to be successful in analyzing the world if you don't recognize how complex human life and humans are ultimately.
So I kind of like what you laid out because I think it hints at a lot of my opposition to what you said. Okay, so I agree. The world's very complex. And I think that is the case, almost the case for moralism, ironically enough. So you have a complex world where people make choices that are trade-offs and such. And there are a lot of factors that play into, I guess, people's decision-making as a whole. But because things are complex, that's kind of how we justify a lot of things that are bad. And if you lean into, we need to understand all these situations because everything's complex, then you end up with like a technocratic situation where it's like, well, all these things are complex, so we need certain people to handle it. And then you kind of end up with the argument in favor of like stuff in the national defense sector. So like every case for the CIA is based on this technocratic situation, or like everything about diplomacy is based on a lot of technocratic reasoning. So if I sit here and say we should never go to war ever, period, and war is evil, then it's like, well, you're moralizing, Matt. It's a complex situation. But then the same could be said about the economy. We hire a bunch of economists. We teach them a bunch of things about fractional reserve banking, and we put them in place of power to do that to the greatest extent. It's like, well, Matt, you want to end taxation and end this because you think it's evil, but you're moralizing there are all these things going on. The issue with the complex, the idea of the complex world is it is very complex, but if it hinges on something that is deeply immoral, then it doesn't matter that it's complex. So if you tell me, well, Matt, your policy, you maybe point out this is immoral, but you can't just undo that on day one. It's like, no. I'm making the case that this is one of the ultimate evils and is one of the most invalidating things to human autonomy that goes on in our society. So I understand it's complex, and I will use this charge language because other people will tell you, and people from like the Borg will tell you, hey, this is complex. You can't just say that. You can't just get rid of the Federal Reserve. And it's like, no, the Federal Reserve devalues every single person's savings in this country and makes it so your currency isn't backed by anything real. And if the Federal Reserve goes too far, all of a sudden we're going to wake up, realize that our money is worth half the money that it used to be worth. That's terrible. And we're risking that because the Federal Reserve exists and they don't have to exist. So I'm not afraid to call them immoral. But people will point to, well, it's complex as a way to, I guess, dodge the moral question. But the moral question is still there, and it's still a thing that needs to be reckoned with. So that's kind of like, I think saying it's complicated, it's like, sure, it is. But I think that's irrelevant. And I would even triple down on it and say, part of the reason I'm unhappy with the Libertarian Party is that they don't moralize enough. The Libertarian Party goes out there and they talk about certain things the government has done that's inefficient. So they go out there and they say, Donald Trump did this is bad management, we need to roll back government because it's inefficient. And to some extent, if I'm trying to communicate with you, and that's why we have a lot of conversations on this show, I mean, we have done our deep dives on our different moral intuitions, but we've also done ones where I've been like, well, actually, this one's just worse for people. And here's why. Well, all the Cato Institute does and all like Reason Magazine does is show when government makes things worse, when everybody thinks they make things better. That's fine and all, but I want a party out there saying, hey, you know what? Frankly, even if you try to make this case that the mainstream believes, it doesn't matter because you're murdering people. And sometimes that simple fact, even though there's a whole complex layer of, okay, but we care about X, Y, and Z tensions and we're trying to micromanage all of it, it almost proves the point. It's like, I don't want people managing human lives like that. That's disgusting and dehumanizing, and moralizing it draws attention to the fact that this is a disgusting system that shouldn't exist. So even though the system's complex, I think it should be torn down. So I'm going to moralize because the system should be torn down, and I want people willing to tear it down. So if I say something like Tom Wolfe is an evil person, who's the governor of Pennsylvania, I believe Tom Wolf's an evil person because Tom Wolf works in a system and he thinks the system should be upheld. And I think every day that system violates the basic rights of people. And you could say, well, it's complex because the government in Pennsylvania does all these things that are integral to certain people's lives. And I would say, yeah, and we can figure them out, and those can be replaced by people who aren't brutally, violently stealing from others while simultaneously ruining people's lives with obtuse regulations. It's like Tom Wolf is sitting in a position where he can make people's lives freer and better, and he's actively not doing it, actively making it less free, and he's happy about it. So I would say, yeah, he's a bad person for doing all that with a smile on his face and patting himself on the back. I would say he's evil. I don't think he knows he's evil. I don't think he has those same intuitions I have, or else he wouldn't be doing it. But I think it's pretty cut and dry if I laid out my argument that he's an evil person. And I think people need to say that, or else people will respect Tom Wolf, because the factory settings is to respect government because nobody wants to get in a shootout with government. So the factory setting is democracy is good, government's good. And it's like, no, Tom Wolf is an evil person. He can make you more free tomorrow, and he doesn't care about you. He could say he cares about you. He could think he cares about you, but he doesn't want you to be a free individual, or else he'd let you do things. But instead they criminalize it and they'll throw you in a cage if you do things they don't like. It's like, that's what an evil person is, even though a lot of society doesn't think that's what an evil person is. I think that's, so I guess what I'm saying is, I think moralizing is more productive in some circumstances because I'm not an institutionalist. If I was an institutionalist and had the opposite views, I would think moralizing is bad, because moralizing is likely to work against institutions I think should exist. But since I don't think those institutions should exist, so I think moralizing is the best way to get there. That's kind of why I've mentioned that I'm happier talking to a radical leftist than I am like a generic neocon. It's because the radical leftist also wants to tear down the system. So at least even if I have different views from them, it's like at least we both want to knock down the same thing, and they could retreat to their commune and I can just live without being impeded by the state. I don't have to join a commune, but it's like if we have common enemy, that's a good thing. And I think moralism is the way to get there. So that's actually like the thing I'm looking forward to most about 2024, is I'm hoping that's the direction the LP goes. So yeah, I know you vehemently probably disagree with what I just said, so I'll let you get a word in. But like that's been my train of thought for like the last few weeks.
So occasionally I find myself in the strange position where we think we're having a disagreement, and then we get closer to the end of the conversation, and I'm not even sure we were ever disagreeing in the first place. Maybe we're not quite there yet. I don't know. I don't agree, or I do agree. I'm not using this argument, and if I were, I would be disagreeing with myself. I'm not using this argument as a way to dodge the moral question. I'm using this argument to I'm using this argument to go past again a rigid moral framework to create a moral framework which is far more nuanced far more nuanced. Someone the other day said to me that, right and wrong, it's almost more shades of gray than it is black and white. And so here's I guess another way I could you can conceptualize it. So we've done quite a few episodes on religion on this podcast. One of my issues with Christianity, for example, at least Christianity as it existed for much of human history. It's a bit different now. It had very extremely rigid, dogmatic moral framework. You couldn't you couldn't have sex with someone of the same sex. You couldn't consume alcohol. You couldn't smoke cigarettes. You couldn't use recreational drugs. You couldn't. There's just so many things you couldn't do because God said so, or because this passage in the Bible says this. But that is just. I think that is a way to kind of it's a way to feel in control, I guess, of this crazy world. But it's a unhealthy way to try to remain in control, and it cuts you off from certain like human experiences, and it treats the world as, again, simpler than it is. Again, I can go through. Look, look. Let me put it this way: I have no love for most of like U.S. presidents. Well, certainly in my lifetime, but like the U.S. presidents since practically, post World War II, the majority of them, if not all of them, have been or have done horrible things. The policies they've done have been, I would say, they have been more harmful than beneficial. And if we wanted to simplify that conversation, if we have ever had a conversation about the presidents, I could literally just focus on U.S. foreign policy alone and go down the list of the horrible things every president, every post-World War II president has done in terms of foreign policy that led to people dying, led to governments being toppled for no reason, led to just destabilization of certain regions around the world, which again led to death and more destruction. But I just don't think I don't think it's helpful, again, to go back to these terms like good and bad and evil and right and wrong. If we're taking those terms at face value and we're not interpreting those terms as just language we're using that doesn't quite reach the mark, but it's like the closest thing we can come to maybe in the moment, or it's the easiest way we can communicate certain things, even though we're not communicating them in a very precise manner. Again, it's like Barack Obama is not a terrible person. Barack Obama has done some terrible things. And again, he has blood on his hands. I don't know how he sleeps at night. I'm not here to defend Barack Obama, but I am here to say that, again, I am trying to, and I think this is probably maybe where we do agree, I'm trying to dig down, I'm trying to dig deeper than platitudes like that, and really get behind, why he did what he did and why people generally do what they do. The funny thing is, there's really one thing we don't understand in this whole universe, and it's the human mind. And so I'm not willing to say that Barack Obama is a horrible person, but I am willing to I am willing to look at what he did and look at what everybody did in such a way which is fair, but is also grounded in our values.
So I think we're doing one of those classic where we're disagreeing without a disagreement, because it sounds like the first thing you said was essentially a rehash of we're both against dogmatism. So it's like, yeah, we're both against bad arguments, and then your example was a religious argument or religious appeals. And if you haven't listened to this show before, it's like we've done episodes on Harris and Peterson and their debates, but in general, Matt and I don't have a problem pretty much being a little bit dismissive towards religion, because neither of us are religious, and we're not really in a position to steelman the argument or straw man it. But a lot of times when we give examples, we kind of trash religion a little bit. But it's because to us appealing to the Bible doesn't mean anything. So we see that as a dogmatic argument and doesn't mean a lot. And I'm sure people could get upset with that, and that's another conversation. But we're not going to go into that right now. So it's like, okay, yeah, I agree that we both are against dogmatism. Sounds like the second thing that you're like kind of hinting at is the reason you don't like good, bad, and evil is because it's easy to conflate things that are both evil. So it's saying like, if I say Obama's evil, you're like, well, Hitler's also evil. And it's like, yeah, they're both evil, but I obviously don't think Obama's as bad as Hitler. Somebody could think that, but I would say they're thinking it wrong, and that's them conflating it is the issue. And sure, it makes it kind of easy to conflate things. If I say Hitler and Obama are both evil people, somebody could walk in and say, oh, you're saying that they're both evil and they're both equally evil. It's like, well, no, because Obama didn't kill millions of people, but Obama's a very terrible person, and I would double down on that. So I think in the end, we're disagreeing on things that are just, it's almost like our intuitions on how much respect we should treat people with. And it's, or it's not even necessarily treating them with respect, because Obama's not listening to this conversation. So it's not really like we're hurting his feelings by me saying, no, I think he's a terrible person. It's not really about how much respect we're treating him with, but it's really about the semantic decency we're willing to say in our words. And I'm okay with letting people take morally charged language, because I think at worst, if they misinterpret me, it radicalizes them in the direction that's at least beneficial towards me. So if more people think Obama's literally, evil, I would actually I almost think of me saying Obama's an evil person as like a thesis, but I know a lot of people wouldn't hear it that way, because then I can lay out a book of evidence about Obama being an evil person. So it's like, okay, I can see why you wouldn't like that charged language, but in the end, since you and I disagree, and I want every institution to get teared down, if more people think Obama's evil, then that's a good thing. I'd be happy if people misunderstood me and their only takeaway was he was pretty convincing about Obama being terrible, then I'd be like, well, that's a win, because if more people think Obama's terrible, and maybe if more people think all the presidents are terrible, then we'll have a better world, because nobody will trust the government to any degree, because everybody will think our leaders are some of the most corrupt people who exist, or the most morally bankrupt people who exist. And I'm okay with people walking away with that, even if I wouldn't make that specific claim, because I don't necessarily think Obama's completely morally bankrupt. I just think I don't want to say indoctrinate. He could have come to his views in his own unique way that might not be indoctrination, but I think his views are evil, so I'm going to call him evil. And I think it works to my benefit. So I kind of think it's just more of like, how radical vernacular do we want to use? And I'm at this point, I'm like, because I have no respect for these people anymore, and I wish the worst things upon them, because I think they're bad people, and I think they're ruining people's lives or dehumanizing them. So but I think I have much more personal disdain towards these people than you do, and I think that's just like a matter of like personal degree. And if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, I don't even think we'd be having this nuanced disagreement, because this has been a shift. But like, I'm at the point where like, literally the worst thing that you could imagine could happen to Tom Wolfe tomorrow, and I would say, good, that is good news. And I'm not exaggerating. So, and this is kind of a Michael Malice thing, because Michael Malice did recently tweet at Andrew Cuomo after he said something that was, I guess, dehumanizing towards people in terms of taking their rights away. Michael Malice said, you deserve to be in Gitmo. And I was like, yeah, you do. He does deserve being Gitmo. And so somebody can turn around and say you shouldn't think that because you're a libertarian and you believe in the non-aggression principle. And I think if you do anything to Tom Wolfe, the governor of Pennsylvania, I think it's self-defense, because I think he's been deeply violating the non-aggression principle. I'm not even saying that to be, well, I actually am saying that to be radical, because I want people to be radical, and I believe that. But yes, he's been violating your rights, so I don't think you should treat him with decency or respect. You should say he's an evil person and bad things should happen to him. And luckily for me, we live in the United States where I can say that, and I can only be legally culpable if I directly incited violence. So I'm not in the situation to say that if somebody hears this podcast and does something, I didn't incite it. But I'm just saying he deserves whatever he gets, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's the correct lens to view the situation in the world. And I know this sounds kind of like Antifa, but it's like the Antifa way of looking at things, but actually being correct with your argument that underlines the Antifa action. The problem is their arguments suck. Their actions they're taking wouldn't be bad if their arguments made sense. So that's how I would defend that. I know that's irrelevant, but a listener might cross their mind as they're listening to me say that stuff. So yeah, I know that was a rant. I think I kind of encapsulated though the distinction. I could be wrong. I agree with you. I don't think we're having that much of a real argument, because we both hate dogmatic buffoons that say throwaway lines like, well, of course Trump is Hitler. We all take that for granted here. It's like, well, no, he's not Hitler. And it's like, if you're gonna call somebody evil, you should be able to back it up. But I think if it's okay, and I think you should do it because that's politics I want, right? And that's where we kind of start parting ways, maybe. And this kind of did turn into us talking about the LP, because I know we kind of mentioned that that's something we want to chat about. So that's kind of my thoughts on where the LP should go to. I hope it does.
I suppose it's probably about time to wrap up. So I'll just kind of make one more like broad point, or like general point, just kind of hammer home, I guess, what I'm getting at. And so to make this point, I'm going to rewind to however many episodes ago, I have no remember, when we did one on the death penalty. And this is relevant because I am vehemently opposed to the death penalty, and I'm vehemently opposed to the death penalty basically for arguments similar to what I'm giving now. And actually, to quote, to cite Noam Chomsky again, because I have to do that as a radical leftist, he has some quote from one of his books. I don't remember which book. He says something like, if the Nuremberg laws were applied to the U.S. or to apply to the United States, every post-war World War II president would be hanged. But I don't think, if that were possible, if we could like raise all those presidents from the dead and like put all of them on trial, I would not support putting them to death. I would support putting them in jail for the rest of their life, rotting away in a prison cell. But I would not support just out and out, putting them up against the firing squad and shooting them, because I think I value, I think I value, I guess, what people have the potential to be, even if they've done horrible, terrible things. And I guess I also think that at some level, maybe this is kind of where I start to moralize. I think, I'm not sure. I don't believe like an eye for an eye. I don't believe in an eye for an eye sort of philosophy. I think we should try to rise above when people are doing horrible things. I think as a society we should try to not retaliate in the same way, but show them that we can treat them well, or we can treat them with respect, even if they're not going to treat other people with respect. And that might not, if someone's an out and out sociopath, it might not matter to them. It might not ever go through their head. They might be too far gone. But that's a value, I guess, that's very important to me. And I guess to give like one more very quick example, this is an example of religion at its best, or like of Christianity at its best. So I remember when Dylan Roof shot up that black church, there was obviously a lot about it on the news, and there was a clip. They had the authorities had like set up some video chat between him and the victims, or the families of the victims, and some lady was giving a religious argument, and she was like, I forgive you. And that stuck with me. That was very powerful. Again, that's one example of what I can say. That's religion. That's a kind of a religious attitude I can get behind. Here was this woman who had been horribly, she was confronted by a man who had, made her life worse by killing a relative or a fan or a friend or something, and she was able to overcome her anger towards him to say, I forgive you. I think that's something we could all benefit from, and we could all learn from in our personal lives, and when we're talking about big issues related to public policy and our interpretation of the actions of our elected leaders.
I think I mostly agree with that. I think the only two nuances I would make is, but if you were in the church and Dylan Roof is still shooting, you would like, be willing to shoot at him if you had a gun, right? And that kind of goes without saying. And that's how I feel about, like, say, Tom Wolfe, right? So I feel like Tom Wolfe. I'm not literally calling him a school shooter. Calm down. You don't have to back away from the camera like I said something shocking. I'm just saying Tom Wolfe is still in the act of completely harming people and not rolling things back. So I would treat Tom Wolfe differently than I would treat a president who died 60 years ago. I don't think we need to retroactively hang them to make a point, or like, I don't think we need to kill Jimmy Carter 2 years before he died to prove a point. But all the people who are in power, if somebody like tries to do a mini, like I think that this is pretty radical for me to say. The feds are definitely listening to me, so I'm going to just qualify what I say with, I'm not going to take any action. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just saying what I'm okay with. So I'm not planning on doing anything. I have my comfy desk job, but I made a few grand off Bitcoin recently. Like, I'm chilling. So, but all I'm saying is, like, there were people who recently got arrested by, like, the FBI, and they were allegedly planning on kidnapping a governor. And I think their plan was really stupid. Like, they weren't even going to kill her. They were going to, like, kidnap her and turn her into cops, like give her to the cops and say she should go to jail or something really stupid. And I'm pretty sure half the people in on the plot were all undercover CIA and didn't know the other undercover CIA people were also CIA. So it could have all been like, this is what the CIA does all the time with like, whenever they prevent a bombing, it's like, well, they gave the guy the bomb and they stopped him. So it's all stupid anyways. But the point is, if a governor got kidnapped, and the guy who was threatening to kidnap that governor was saying some anarchist stuff that sounded both left and right anarchist, but he was using some language that sounded pretty like right-wing anarchist. And if for those reasons, if you're essentially saying this person has all the power to make people stop violating my rights on a daily basis, and this person won't do it, they're evil, and they're constantly doing it, and it's never going to change, and nobody's going to hold these people accountable, and then they go and do something really, really, really crazy, I'm not going to be pissed about it. And I'm not going to uphold the decorum, because the status quo is terrible. So I'm not going to say, oh yeah, people who do these evil things and are in the process of doing evil things should never be touched. It's like, no, if you infringe the rights of hundreds of millions of people every day, then you're going to get people who have a problem with it and are willing to risk their life to go do it. So I'm not saying you should do it, and I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I'm definitely not going to do it. But if somebody does, I'm not going to be pissed. And it's because it's like, sure, like, George W. Bush has been out of office. He's not harming anybody anymore, and maybe he can be reasoned with. But he's out of power. So it doesn't matter what he thinks or feels anymore. What he's done is done. I don't need us to retroactively hang him. I don't see the big deal in doing that. I don't think that's necessary. But if you think somebody is still holding up the violent system, then I'm not going to just say we should turn the other cheek to that. I'm going to say, and I'm a big fan of as I brought this up in like the first 5 episodes of the show, but I'm a big fan of the types of mediation when it comes to crimes with victims, where you ask the victims like how they feel and what kind of sentencing they'd want. And then if you have a victim who's like, hey, you did this terrible thing to me, I forgive you, be a better person. I'm giving you a second chance, and I believe you can turn it around, because you're not always going to get a second chance, but I have the good grace to help you out and say, hey, I know you broke into my house, killed my dog, and stole $800 of my stuff, but I'm not going to get you put in a cage for 10 years. You need to rehabilitate your life, though. If somebody says that, that's great. You might have redeemed a person. But the fact is, what's done is done. And as the person shooting your dog and stealing your stuff, you're not gonna let them keep doing it unless you're at risk of dying. If you had the gun and were behind them, you'd probably shoot them, right? So that's how I feel about the government now, or people who are currently in power. So I agree with everything you said, but I just don't think it's an applicable analogy. And then I know you won't agree with my analysis, but whatever. You get the last word, and I'll promise just to wrap up after. I'm being really radical. I think I want to get on a Fed watch list or two, because I need more drama in my life. And maybe if I keep saying things that like are overtly pro-violence towards government officials, it'll bump up the listeners, because we'll get people in the CIA who start tuning in. Maybe I should put like death to Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Her name's Gretchen Whitmer. Whitmer? I don't know. Maybe I should put that as one of the tags, so then when they search it, the episode comes up. That might be good. But everything I say only reflects my opinions and not my co-hosts. And he is not a radical person who's okay with intense violence against government officials, apparently. But I am. So thumbs up on that.
Forgive me for my intense laughing fits if people are watching the video later on. Actually, I really, I think this kind of is a, I can wrap a bow on this present and like, kind of like, I feel like I got somewhere with this conversation. I kind of went far away from Michael Malice's red pill concept. So I'm sorry. We can like do another episode where if I go down rabbit holes, you can like tell me to stop. But I really think I guess my whole overarching point has been I think morality is just extremely nuanced, and I think this almost goes back to a certain form of consequentialism. But I think it really depends. Like when we're talking about the morality or immorality of an action, I think it often depends. And I think you could almost say the same thing about you could call the same action moral or immoral in different contexts. So if I had, okay, here's an easy example. There was an assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler that obviously failed because he had to kill himself before the Allies got to him. But I think you can make a reasonable argument that the people who were plotting Hitler's assassination had it been successful, you could say that was a moral thing to do because of who Hitler was. Even though generally speaking, we would say, and of course I would agree, that murder or assassination is wrong. Perhaps another example would be, well, we've been talking about Obama a lot in this conversation. One thing Obama did that most Americans agree with, he had Osama bin Laden killed. Now, you can have a conversation as to whether, like, the intricacies of like foreign policy maybe he should have been like captured and put on trial, et cetera, et cetera. But did I lose any sleep? Am I losing any sleep knowing that the U.S. government killed Osama bin Laden? No, of course not. And you could make an argument that that was a moral thing to do. So, in some ways, actually, we might agree on our radicalism. In that, I think radical action, or I think like action, which in certain contexts, or maybe I think actions in one context might be moral, and in another context might be immoral. And I think it depends a lot more on the context. And so that really is kind of my overarching point for this episode. Just I want us to remember that the nuances, how nuanced the world is, and how nuanced human behavior has to be, and therefore I don't think it's easy to say things are good or bad, or good and evil, or right or wrong. I think it depends, I guess, in many ways on context, rather than some like abstract principle you could cite in a philosophy class.
I agree with most of that, which is good because I'm wrapping up the show. So it would have been bad if I tried to make us go another 10 minutes. That wouldn't have turned out well. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed this attempted episode about Michael Malice's view on the red pill. We talked about that for about 9 minutes before we got completely derailed in typical fashion. So maybe at some point we'll revert back to talking about, and the funny thing is too, it wasn't even supposed to be about Michael Malice, but it was more about, I wanted to talk about the worldview that kind of follows from the view he laid out. So if I said, okay, I agree with this version of the red pill, what implications does this have on my worldview? And are these implications something that are verifiable? So maybe that's kind of like how I want to delve into it. Like I want to talk about like, okay, well, what does this even say about democracy if you believe in this? Like, is this saying like every power structure will be co-opted because there's always going to be somebody who's trying to propagandize and propaganda can be effective, blah, blah. Like these are all the things I kind of want to like spend like 15 minutes on here or there. But instead we talked about radicalism. I guess it's just been too front and center in my mind that I well, what's the word? What's the word that the people who like crystals always say? I accidentally manifested it into happening. I think that's I manifested it. Yeah. So we ended up having a episode on radicalism, which is good, and we should be talking about more radical things here and there when we have the chance. But I think that was a good intro to at least my views on it, and I think you said things that were reasonable, especially about context there, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed. You can listen to a lot less overtly Fed baiting episodes in our backlog that you can find on any podcatcher or on YouTube. Those episodes are us trying to actually be to some extent trying to be academic about topics that are philosophical. So sometimes we talk about moral intuitions, which those ones get heated. Sometimes we talk about religion. We talk about like Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris debates and things that we reacted to in those debates. And we've had a lot of just good, thoughtful discussions that, as the whole point of this episode that was supposed to be about the red pill kind of hints at, is it goes beyond the stupid garbage that Brian Stelter and Anderson Cooper say on CNN that just upholds the norm. We actually like try to evaluate things, which is beyond the 4-person panel of shouting that you see on cable news. So you can check all that out, and that's all pretty easily available. I hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to subscribe or leave a review. But until next time, signing off, it's Mad Matt.